who is my aspirational self? Maybe my aspirational self is someone who thinks clearly, who doesn't snap at people, or you can create like an identity, a true identity. When he was writing Atomic Habits, his own habits were just in complete disarray. I'm working on this like really in-depth article that I'm going to publish in the profile on the techniques that the world's truly best interviewers do.
Before we start this podcast, I have one little favor to ask you. Can you please hit the subscribe button down below so we can help more people every single week? Thank you. Let's kick off. I really appreciate this. Where I want to start is, I want to get your opinion on something. Do you think Taylor Swift has built the biggest cult in the world at the moment?
I really do. When I wrote that dossier, I mean, she was big, but she had kind of disappeared. She was in London somewhere. And it's like her fans were still so loyal. And then when she reemerged, now she's even stronger. So yes, 100% I do.
Why do you think that is? Because it's not like a one-hit wonder. Yeah, she's been around for many, many years, right? And it's a continuously snowballing, and it's a flywheel effect. Every time we go around, it gets bigger and better and stronger. So why do you think that is?
Yeah, fun fact, I know one of her ex-boyfriends that she went to high school, I think homecoming with, I don't know. His name was also Taylor, so that was hilarious. But no, so I followed Taylor Swift since I was in high school when she was still doing country. Followed her career. I really like her, obviously, as, you know, as an artist, but also as a businesswoman. And I think that when you read a lot of the press around Taylor Swift, it's always, people refer to her as calculated and manipulative and things like that. And it's like, no, I think she's just like a very savvy businesswoman. The thing that Taylor does that has built her brand so big and her cult following so loyal is that she does things that are not scalable. And that on its face value like doesn't make sense. Like, why would you do things that aren't scalable? And it's that's what builds that hardcore lifelong loyalty to a brand or an artist. And she's mastered that. Most artists who are so big would never do things that aren't scalable. Like, what's in it for them? What she does is she'll surprise fans at their weddings by showing up. Like, takes a lot of time, effort, money, energy, but she does it. She also she went through her Instagram and just found random fans and DM'd them. Imagine getting a DM from Taylor Swift on Instagram and invited them to her house to bake cookies and listen to her new album ahead of time. And she called these like secret sessions. Great name too. And she'll like, sometimes she'll send random fans gifts. And it's just like, why? And the reason is, once you've converted that person, they will be with you for life. But it's not just that person, it has ripple effects. That person will then tell someone, somebody will talk about this secret session. And it's like, it's almost like, oh my gosh, I know someone who went to her house. I know someone who went to homecoming with Taylor Swift. Like, all these things start to seep into the culture. And you know that she is a human being who does human things, because what most successful people and artists especially get wrong, I think, is that the bigger they get, the more, the less human they become. And that's kind of my newsletter, the profile. It's like, how do you make these people human?
I completely agree. Like, I worked in scale up companies as well as like Fortune 500, Fortune 50 companies. And the bigger they get, the more that they lose their customer. But often the scrappy startup that got to the 1 billion valuation sat with their customers for many years. And it's the same with an artist. And most companies are founder-led, brand-led at this point, whereby it's people like, you almost forget that. But it's almost like, what got you there, you need to evolve for sure. But you also you can't forget the fundamentals. You write about thinking clearly. This is something that I really try to filter in my own system, and even like the education we have with our podcast and the profile. And I think we've been kind of on a similar path because you'd been interviewing so many high profile people and similar to myself. How can someone think clearly and really think on their own without a lot of outside interference?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things to do. I recently heard James Clear on a podcast say that, when he was writing Atomic Habits, his own habits were just in complete disarray. And his
Mm,
publisher said, "Don't worry, that's normal. A lot of people write the book they need to read." And it was like that for me. The Thinking Clearly chapter, and I write a lot on the profile about clarifying your thought. The reason that it's so, I enjoy it so much, it's because I myself want to think more clearly.
mm-hmm,
And there's a part in the book where I talk about Julia Galiff, who came up with this framework of, you have, um, when you're trying to defend or when you're sharing an idea with someone, and let's say they push back, there's two ways you could go about it. There's your like soldier mindset. You could be like a soldier. You could defend your
mm,
idea. You could fight to the death and like all this stuff, but you don't see clearly because you're clearly defending a side, versus a scout, which the scout's job is to go out to the terrain, survey it, make a map of all the things that they see, who are the key players, just very
mm,
objectively evaluate the circumstances and then bring back more accurate information because they've evaluated it dispassionately without, strong emotion. A
mm,
soldier has strong emotion. They want to win. And so if you kind of look at your life like that, in what areas are you just um, emotionally drunk, drunk
mm,
with emotion, where you cannot see the terrain clearly. And maybe, it's just adding one more step of, before, when I have this idea, let's say you have an idea for a business and you get all this outside interference, like you said, and feedback and things like that. What if in the beginning stages you just try to evaluate each piece of feedback as dispassionately as you could before
mm,
you make a decision? And I think that's really valuable. On The other thing that Julia says is that a lot of times we attack each other instead of, attacking the idea. So
mm,
Ed Catmull at Pixar, the way that they think clearly or come to think clearly is that actually you take a lot of passionate people, put them in a room, and have them start attacking and debating the idea, because that makes it better instead of attacking each other. And I think it's incredibly hard to do, but once you kind of get it, you start looking at the world that way. Like, am I a soldier or am I a scout? And it can help you clarify your thinking.
I like that because a lot of people, it's conditioning. And the examples you have, it's a condition from when you're young and you set out a set of beliefs and then you get into jobs that you follow down and you even do businesses and you stay in them. But it's almost, if you ever read The Creative Act by Rick Rubin,
Yeah.
he talks about the beginner mind, always having the ability to go from zero. And I'm curious from your perspective, like when you left the journalism world, like how did you detach from that, I guess, idea that that's what you wanted to do initially? Because that was actually quite me in the VC world, in the tech startup world, and I had left that world then to come into the media space. Very similar setup to you, to be honest. Very quite similar.
It's so hard. Um, it's so hard because you have these deep-seated beliefs. You don't even know where they came from, but you feel them so strongly that you take them as fact. For
Hmm.
me, a few of those were from college. I've been in journalism like all my life. So when I was in college, I would constantly hear professors, people I respected and trusted, tell me that if I want to be a journalist, just get ready to make no money. You're never going to make money as a writer. Nobody's ever going to pay for your work. So that kind of like stuck with me. It became my belief system. So then, when I first worked at a media startup that did not pay me well, but then when I got to Fortune, I was like, wow, Fortune magazine, like they actually pay you for your work. They pay well. Maybe that belief isn't quite true, but maybe there is a ceiling. I still had that. When I was at Fortune, the other thing I thought was, I'm a writer and this is my identity, and I could never be an entrepreneur. I could never be these other things because I am a writer. And I once heard, once I read Tara Westover in her book Educated talks about like who put those ideas in your head? Like, did, did this come from your dad? Did this come from your best friend from high school? Did it come from your teacher that you respected in college? So it's like, once you identify whose voice that is, because oftentimes it is not your clearly thinking voice, you can start to dispel it a little bit. And when I left Fortune to work on the profile full time, suddenly I wasn't just a writer. I was an entrepreneur. I was a plumber. I was
An accountant.
yeah, I was everything. And so it's like it's sometimes those beliefs go unexamined and they
Mhm.
can wreak havoc on your life. But I think it was Elon Musk who said basically, like, uh, be careful what you let into your mental firewall, because those things will define who you are and how you see the world.
Yeah, it was very similar for me. I felt like I wanted to become like a chief product officer, and I was like on path for it. That's what I wanted to do. That was part of my identity. And then when I left, it was chief everything officer, right? That's what an entrepreneur is. And it was just that combination of what I thought I could do versus what I could actually do. And the thing is that you could fill the gaps very easily, right? Not very easily, but you could solve the problems because it was built up so much. And Leila Hormozi talks about like fear is a mile wide and an inch deep. And it's just
Mm.
very easy once you kind of get forward momentum to keep on going. So, of course, it's an absolute shit show. There's no doubt about that, right? But I think removing that limiting belief could have saved me 4 or 5 years. I put it that way.
Mhm.
And I'm happy that I discovered it still in my mid to late 20s, being like, this is not what I wanted to achieve. I want
Yeah.
to ask you about the alter ego opinion, right? And the alter ego approach. So the example you use is Goggins, and a lot of people that will listen to this. Do you think it's worthwhile creating that frame? Because a lot of guys will create another frame, like, I don't want to go back to a 9 to 5. I don't want to go back to a job. I hate my boss. I hate that lifestyle. So it's almost like they create that devil, and then they work towards like the heaven analogy then, which is what could be from what they can build in the future.
Yeah. In the book, I talk about how it's easier to know who you do not want to be before it is who you do want to be. So, for example, Francis Ngannou, who's MMA champion, he talked about he grew up in Cameroon, very poor, and his dad was like this violent guy who abused his mom. He would get in fights like all the time. So Francis said, he's the best role model I had because he showed me who I do not want to be. That's not who I want to be as a dad. That's not who I want to be as a friend, as a husband. So it's easier for us to identify the things that we don't want to do or the people who we don't want to be. And then once you have that, that's like you said, like that's the hell part. Then you turn to, who is my aspirational self? Maybe my aspirational self is someone who thinks clearly, who doesn't snap at people, who's very, even keeled. Or you can create like an identity, a true identity. My aspirational self is a worldwide, famous, like respected boxer. And what does that person, what are their habits that I can start implementing today? In Francis's case, it was, um, they don't drink alcohol. They work out every day. They take care of their body. They sleep well. So he started doing those things as a teenager, and all his friends were like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I am an elite athlete." He like became
Mm.
his aspirational self before he ever reached it. So I think you'll see a lot of the successful alter egos are something of that sort. They name them, but then they also give them the habits that they want to embody. For Beyonce, it was Sasha Fierce. Like, I'm going to be extroverted and a powerhouse. I'm going to go out on that stage and I'll be very, intense. That's not who I am in my real life, but that's who I aspire to be. And then over time, as you create these habits, they kind of end up they you end up becoming more of that person, and then you don't need the outro more. For me, like, I mean, if you had met me 10, 15 years ago, I was super introverted, I was super shy, I would never say yes to a podcast. But it's like, over time, as you start to believe in this identity, you can become it.
And what I love so much about your work is I went quite deep in it, and I know your story that you came and you were quite shy and you didn't speak English in America. But what's so amazing to see is the fact that you've taken so much inspiration from the people who document in the profile that it started almost embedding into your like your downloads, your actual downloads. And I was actually a close friend of mine who's actually from Ireland as well, but we both live outside of Ireland and he's based in Dubai. He sent me a note recently being like, the more I analyze your work, the more I see like the 200 people you interviewed just show
Interesting.
up and show up in how you just act, like how I run my business, how I interact, and that's neither negative nor positive. It's just the traits are being not replicated, downloaded effectively. So I'm interested to
Mhm.
see like when did you start seeing that tick for yourself? Because a lot of people will look at like newsletters and podcasts as like an additional thing you should do. It's not something you should do as your core focus, but for you, it was your core focus. And for me, it's been my core focus. So it's been my main source of information back to the original part of this conversation.
Yeah, I think for me specifically, it's about how I learn. And I know that I'm very impressionable in terms of if I spend a lot of time watching a video of Oprah doing interviews, or if I watch someone for a long period of time read their work, listen to their podcasts, I start to kind of absorb their not their thought patterns, but maybe even just like the way they talk and the way they sit in their mannerisms. Maybe it came because I was that like really shy 8-year old that was like, how can I be American? And it's like, here's, they talk with their hands. And I've always had that. They're more extroverted, things like that. And I started like picking up on that. So for me, I know that if I spend a lot of time with someone, I'll naturally, it'll start to seep in. For example, right now, I'm working on this like really in depth um, article that I'm going to publish in the profile on what the techniques that the world's truly best interviewers do. And it's not the, oh, they listen intently and they, are present. And like, we all know that. They all do that. But I want to get like in the super, super specific, how do they interrupt? What kinds of questions do they ask when the person's not giving them a good answer? Or, how do they get you to open up when you're super closed off? Do you mirror them? Do you, like Joe Rogan does that a lot, where he won't ask a direct question, he'll just repeat the keywords of your last statement,
Hmm.
and then it forces you to like tell him more because obviously you feel like he's not satisfied with the answer and you want to elaborate. So things like that. As I'm watching all these videos, I find myself kind of implementing them. Like I was watching Oprah's interview with Meghan and Harry, and Meghan at one point reveals something that she did not plan to reveal in this interview. She gets super uncomfortable, and Oprah goes, hold on, I'm going to stop you right there. She makes this whole, like, the interruption becomes the moment. And that went on to be viral. That was everywhere. It was talked about, and nobody expected that moment. But Oprah knew very well what she was doing. She was like, you just said something really, like, it was a bombshell statement. I'm going to take that and I'm going to like magnify it. So as I'm watching this, I'm learning and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to use that in my next interview. You know what I mean? So it's just like, if you admire someone's qualities, maybe not their life, but if you admire some of their qualities and characteristics, just watch 1 week of YouTube videos that they've done. You'll see how you kind of like start embracing some of them.
It's a synthesis of all information coming, and I want to read that the second it's published because that's my main focus as an
Yeah.
interviewer, right? Is like how can I move the conversation in a way that's relaxed for the guest, but at the same point, like bringing them to a point and making it unique too, right? Like having that unique spin that I try to bring across kickoff sessions, but. That's the game, right? And what's funny here
Mhm.
is the fact that from the observation from the outside, it's just oh, it's just interviewing someone. But when you're playing the infinite game, it runs continuously. I want to ask you about your observation from when you were observing to when you were actioning. I know you mentioned that you felt almost like a hypocrite at times, and I was definitely that, right? I was still working for a company interviewing entrepreneurs, right? And it came 100 episodes later, and I was like, all right, I got to do something about this. So for
Mhm.
you, what was that kind of almost pain internally to be like, okay, I need to go fucking do something about this information. Do you want to launch a podcast for your business, but you don't know where to start? Remove the stress, pressure, and all the overwhelm that comes with it by working with Podcast University. If you're an ambitious individual who wants to build your influence online, grow your own podcast, and also stand out from the crowd, Podcast University is for you. We help you with the strategy, equipment, the content, your guests, everything you need to create a top tier podcast. If you want to learn more, check out Podcast University and start your podcast journey today.
I think it always shows up as pain, which is weird.
Yeah.
Like I when I started thinking about so yes, I felt like a hypocrite because I was analyzing people's companies without ever building anything on my own. And I was like, yeah, like you can't be a good analyst. That's
Yeah.
possible. But I still felt like a hypocrite.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, once I started thinking about what would it look like if I left and I tried to be an entrepreneur and build something of my own, once I had that thought, I was like, no, that's stupid. You could never. So I tried to not think about it. And that's when kind of the pain comes in. You start reading things that make you think about it again. You start listening to things and you're like, oh man, that's such a good idea and such a good point. I had never thought about it that way. And then the pain comes of everywhere I turn, I see signs that I should do this, but I don't have the courage to do it. And it's like that cognitive dissonance that has to be solved. Otherwise, you're just in your head all the time. It's a miserable place to be. The day that I decided that I would leave Fortune and go do this, it was like the birds were singing, everything was calm just because I had just made a decision. And I think the indecision is where it's like really painful. And yeah, so I think that until you solve the cognitive dissonance, whether it's, you know what, that's it, I am not that type of person, I'm never going to do this, so I'm not even going to try, or I'm going to try, I might fall flat on my face, but at least I'll have learned something that I can then go apply again, whether it's in another job or another company.
And the thing is, funny thing is, you're never going to turn back, right? We say we're going to go back, but you never turn back. But I describe it as the itch. It's like the itch that you have. And I think it comes with different stuff, right? So for me, it was leaving the job. It was actually giving up alcohol, just like, as a
Yeah.
party boy when I was younger, just giving up alcohol. It's like you get the idea, like maybe drinking alcohol is not a good idea. And then you just kind of like slowly
Yeah.
iterate it. And then it was even like for hiring, like we've hired like quite a lot recently. And its initial itch being like, I don't need to do this, I need to do this, I don't need to do this, I need to do this, and it's a constant like battle. What I'm trying to lean more into now is more like analyzing it from a risk perspective, and then if it makes sense logically and financially, just do it. Because I don't know, are you familiar with the one-way door versus two-way door process? I think it's a Bezos. Are you familiar with that
Yeah.
process?
I
Yeah.
think I've heard that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So one way door is an irreversible decision. So you want to make like irreversible decisions like slowly. So one way door is you go there, you can't turn back. So let's say
Having kids.
deciding to sell your business. Let's put it that way, right? You can't unsell your business. A
Yeah.
two-way door is like you can go back on it. So a two-way
Mhm.
door is we run a new marketing campaign. So that's just basically my only decision making process for basically whatever I do in life anymore, because I can always make that decision. Now there's a few other variables coming to play, but it's allowed me to be less anxious about the scenario and
Yeah.
more focused on the input to deliver the outcome that I'm looking to achieve. And it's just been a good mental model. I don't know for yourself how you process that.
Yeah, I have a quote like that in the book that's like make reversible decisions quickly and irreversible ones deliberately, because the reversible ones you should make them quickly. If they're reversible, if you make them quickly, you actually like learn more from it even if they fail. The irreversible ones you have to make slowly and deliberately, because like you said, selling your business, you can't unsell it. Maybe you can buy it back later, I don't know. But having kids, once you have a child, you will be a parent for the rest of your life. Like you just cannot
Mm.
not be a parent. So it's like that's a really big decision. And I think a lot of people ask me, like, now that you have kids, what do you want them to know, like, what's the best thing about raising them. And my husband actually said this, and I agree. It's that if you can teach them to be good decision makers, everything else takes care of itself. You can teach them, morals and values, and like, don't steal, that's bad, and like whatever. Or, by the way, if you steal, that's kind of an irreversible decision. You might go to jail for 10 years. Like, that's not
Mm.
worth it. So if they can become good decision makers, then it's a frame of mind, like you said, to look at everything in your life. And it's also funny what you just said about, it's, once you make it, you're like, I can always go back. It's a reversible decision, but then you rarely do.
Mhm.
Similarly with drinking, I stopped drinking at the beginning of 2021. Yeah, January 1st, 2021. And I was like, I can always start again. It's not like this is forever. This is just like for this month, like dry January. And then it's been now like 4 years, and I still haven't, or 3 years, whatever it is. I still haven't gone back. But also, by the way, this is really funny that on this podcast there is a Bulgarian and an
And
Irish
Irish.
who do not drink. I just want to point
Oh,
that out.
I'm one of the few. I'm one of the very few. But
Yeah,
I
our
did.
families.
I probably drank enough for all of America during my early 20s, and then I decided I had to stop, and I was like, okay, it had to come
Yeah,
to an end.
no. Talk about, if you're gonna go back. The best test is go to like a family gathering, and when they're
Yeah.
just like, "What are you talking about?" and you're like, "Yeah," you don't go
Yeah,
back.
it's a reality though. What I like to say about that is like it's not why would I, or it's not when will I start drinking again. It's why would I start drinking.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it now, because like I think it snowballs positively, right? I want to ask you about what you learned from Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh, Da Vinci. They were gonna say DiCaprio. I don't know why, and I was like, I don't know.
I learned a lot from DiCaprio too.
That's DiCaprio. Or Da Vinci, the other one. I learned that he came up with this concept of that you can, if you think about two totally different ideas, the brain will naturally start making connections between them. And he actually he would take like a sponge filled, a sponge filled with paint, and throw it against the wall and just watch it drip down. This is like before, people had phones and entertainment. And he would just like watch the paint drip, and he'd be like, huh, I wonder what that is. And like that shape or whatever he saw in the paint would give him an idea for something else. Another time he was rock in the water, like skipping rocks or whatever in the water, and he saw ripple effects. At the same time, he heard a bell go off, and he thought about, I think that's how he like invented the idea that sound travels in waves, because he was also seeing the waves in the water. It's crazy, but it's cool because it's like, if you focus on two different ideas, your brain somehow starts like brainstorming and imagining things, and you start drawing links between them even if they are not related. So I do this all the time. This is something that I like thrive in. I'll be thinking about something. So let's say I'm looking at the world through a lens of I want to put on an event for the profile, let's say. And I start looking at the world through that lens of like, who could be an interesting person for this or something like that. And then I'll be walking down the street and
Mm.
see someone and be like, huh, I wonder if that type of person would be an interesting interview. Or I wonder if, I'll be watching a documentary and I'll be like, oh, wow, look at what this person achieved without the ability to, let's say they didn't have like arms or legs, yet they summited Kilimanjaro. True story. But like that person, that would be a fascinating interview. So I start seeing the world through this like other lens, and it gives me new ideas
Mm.
versus just waiting for the ideas to come to me.
Mm. Yeah, like sitting there and waiting for a business idea to come, right? It's like the worst idea ever. Whereas the way Rick Rubin describes it, well, the way he actually does it, a few different, his is quite unique. It's mind active, body still. So that's why he lies down. He's quite
Mhm.
like known for lying down flat. And I know when Huberman spent a lot of time with him, he did mind active, body still, which is the hardest form of thinking. Whereas most people do body active, mind active. And that's when the muse comes in from reading, walking, like in the gym. Actually, Ruben actually wrote about cleaning the dishes. He was like, he's had the best decisions of his entire life cleaning the dishes. And you almost don't want to take that out because like we're in this world, we're so used to like automating everything, and I'm actually
Mhm.
prime example for that. Like if I don't want to do something at home, I'll like hire someone to do it. I'm so bad for that. Whereas his philosophy is like, no, you want to bring that kind of back because that's when the muse comes in. And that's for me has been everything. It's actually been everything. And any juncture I've come with, any massive inflection point, it's never from really just sitting down at the table and looking at an empty Google Doc where the idea comes from or the solution comes from. Also, sleep is a big thing on this too. The more you can, again, it's an opposite effect to work, right? Work, sleep.
Mhm.
When you sleep, you actually get better ideas for work, and vice versa. So, I see that. I think, how do you action that? Do you keep that focal in your mind, saying, okay, here are two different elements that we want to try to find a connection to? Are you an entrepreneur who wants to build your influence and authority online? You may have tried some of the hacks and tricks, but none of it has worked. And it makes sense. 90% of podcasts don't make it to episode 3. Of the 10% that are left, 90% of them don't make it to episode 20. That's where Voex comes in. Voex creates, manages, and grows your podcast for you on your behalf. If you've not been getting leads, not been growing consistently, you haven't found your tribe, and you don't know what to do, Voex is the answer. Don't just take our word for it. In the past couple of years, we've managed over 35 podcasts. We've also been able to generate over 55 million views with 500 episodes produced. And not only that, generating over $1 million for our clients in products, services, and sponsorships. So if you want to learn more about how you can build a great podcast and have it fully managed for you, schedule a call with me at Voex and we will help you achieve your podcast goals.
Yeah, it's not always like that active, like sitting down and like looking at these two things. A lot of times it's so for example, when I was writing the book, I had ideas. I knew they weren't didn't make sense together, but I knew it was like I've talked about this before, but my mind when I'm writing, I visually literally see the information as like puzzle pieces, and I'm like, I know that one and this one are in the same puzzle, but like there's something in between that I need to figure out. And that's like how I use transitions. It's so weird, but the way that I think about it is like, okay, I know I have this piece here, I have this piece here, there's something here that I don't yet know, so I just like let it go. And then what you're talking about, this like rote activity, is when most people get their best ideas. Sarah Blakely, when she invented Spanx, she got her best ideas driving. It's an activity, but you're not actively thinking about doing it. A lot of people do it shaving, in the shower, running. For me is a big one. When I run, I get ideas. So when I was writing the book, I had these puzzle pieces that didn't make sense together. But then, like in the middle of the night, when I would wake up to feed the baby, suddenly I'd be like, "Oh yeah, like that's how they're related." And if you read the book, you'll notice, like you're like, I think the most common comment I get about it is like, "How the hell did you make this like tie it together in the same chapter?" Because it's like
Mm.
really random people who are in the same chapter that don't make you wouldn't think make sense together. So that's how. And then also, I think it was, I want to say it's Aaron Sorkin. It's definitely a screenwriter. I just can't remember which one, but I'm pretty confident it's Aaron
I
Sorkin.
have it. I have
Do
it.
you
Is it
have
the you can only break the rules when you know them?
it? It's that, but also the showering. No?
Oh damn. No, I
Yeah.
don't remember that.
It's, I think it's Aaron, but I'll look it up and confirm. One of them used to get his best ideas when he was in the shower.
Mm.
So he would start showering like 18 times a day just to be in there to like to think clearly.
Mm.
And I think that like it there's something about like I know where I need to be. Sarah Blakely would do the same thing. She was like, I got my best ideas on the drive to work. But then suddenly, when her office was really close to her house, it was a very short drive. So she would start like driving around the block in circles because she didn't want that brainstorm session to end. And I think that there's like a bigger lesson here about, yeah, it's the road activity, but it's also being away from devices and
For
other
sure.
people talking to you. You just like need to be by yourself.
The only two times where I'm not in a device is either in a podcast, I do a lot of stuff in person, or walking. And as a result, I walk between 7, 8, maybe 9 kilometers a day. And I
Do
started
you listen
walking.
to something when you're walking?
No, no,
Oh, okay.
never.
Okay.
Yeah, never deliberately. So I often, because like I write my newsletter similar to you, like once a week, and people are always like, "Where do the ideas come from?" I honestly come up, think of the idea the Saturday morning when I write it, because it's
Ah,
usually a reflection of the week of what we've done with our work and our content, and it's usually just reflecting on problems and whatever. But I'll just wake up at like 6, I'll walk, the sun will come up, and then just the ideas will come back, and I'll come back and write. But I started walking for health reasons to kind of just not have to do so much cardio. That was the idea initially. Just as like I used to be like a bodybuilder when I was younger, so I was like, if I just walk more actively, I don't have to do cardio. But then I
yeah.
just forgot about that aspect and just did it just purely for this, and it's been crazy. So now it's actually hilarious. Like I will actually spend up to 2 hours a day walking. And actually, if you think about it, I mean, Henry Ford said the hardest job in the world is to think, and that's why most people don't do it. So you often see like the like billionaires like spend a lot of their time thinking and reading, and I could watch a YouTube video, but instead I want to read a book, and it's weird, right? It's just mental models, like how we don't download information and whatnot. I want to ask you about relationships. So
Yeah.
Hidden Genius is all about like the secrets and the background between like millionaires and successful people. But why is relationships in there?
Because relationships are the foundation of anything you do in your life. You can't be a successful person if you don't have a good skill set of building good relationships. People won't
Mm.
trust you in business. Your employees won't trust you. It'll be very hard to negotiate deals. Your partner, like finding a partner, all this stuff, it's based on and rooted in trust. And trust is the bedrock of relationships.
You mentioned about how people cheat on their partner by eroding trust. What does that mean?
So I heard, uh, uh, my gosh, what is her name? Esther Perel. I heard Esther Perel, who's a very successful couples therapist. She has a podcast, all this stuff. But I heard her say once, most people, their relationships don't end because of one big blowout fight. It's not as black and white as, oh, she cheated on me, so I'm gonna leave. It's more of, over the years, you erode that trust and you cheat on each other in very small ways that end up eroding the trust and breaking down the relationship. And that's, you're not present, you don't pay attention when they're trying to get your attention, you're doing something else. Spend more time with other people instead of your partner, like little things that just or you talk behind their back, things that like are not helpful to the relationship, and they don't
Mhm.
add value. And the more that you downward spiral with those little habits that you don't think have an immediate effect on the relationship, over time they are the avalanche that kind of breaks it all down.
It's death by a thousand cuts. That's what I describe it. It's actually just very similar to like friendships as well
Hmm.
as client relationships. We run a client business. It's that if it's a series of small things, it's like as you describe it, it's like an avalanche, right? It's only a small bit of change, and then all of a sudden it kind of drops. And you described it really well with like 5 to 1 concessions of positive to negative impact. So like 5 positive reactions per 1 negative or semi-negative reaction. And you mentioned earlier the best marriage advice is everything in life is a skill that can be improved. What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
yeah, I think me, like a lot of other people, grew up to believe that love is an emotion. Like love is something you feel. The day you don't feel it, like you're done, relationship over, marriage over. And I actually, the more people that I talk to, the more that I learned. I think I wrote in that post that like I was surprised that I learned more from the people who are on their second marriages than the people who are on their
Mm,
first, because they had the benefit of doing something wrong, seeing the mistakes and the consequences of those mistakes, the relationship breaking down, and then having another shot to do it again. And the second time, a lot of them at least, were applying those lessons that they learned the first time around. And it was that. It was like, you know, love is something that you feel, but
mm,
then over a long period of time, you can't just rely on that feeling alone. You have to make it a skill that has to be sharpened constantly. And
mm,
sharpening it constantly means like not letting your bad habits take over and be like, oh, well, I'm in this marriage, like I can be myself, and that's fine. But as you get better and as you put in more effort, it starts to show. Because I think it was John Gottman, another relationship therapist, who said basically, if you do nothing to improve the relationship, it'll deteriorate. So you have to constantly be like doing small things, like the 5-to-1 ratio, making sure that you
mm.
have 5 positive interactions a day to that one negative, so that like the ecology of the relationship maintains.
Hmm. That's super interesting because it's like a business, right? You guys are going moving forward or backwards. It's not staying
Yeah.
still. You know,
Yeah.
well, I'm just trying to think about how that relates to like billionaires when the top 10 billionaires in the world are divorced, right?
Oh, well, that's a whole other thing. I think, I mean, I think
Because if you
like,
think about how that relates in terms of how they don't
yes,
have that time, right? Do you get me? They didn't put the time into that because they put their time into something else.
exactly. Their problem is not the relationships, that they're not good at relationships. Their problem is that they're good at relationships, the ones that they choose, which often are business relationships, and the personal
For
ones
sure.
suffer. That's why I say, like, a lot of times, yes, you think success, you think like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, but I would very much urge people, before you start to emulate or worship, don't,
Mm,
those people, look at their life holistically and not just like one aspect of it, because those people had to make sacrifices and certain compromises that you know nothing about. That, maybe they're not happy, maybe they have billions of dollars, and shocker, maybe they're not actually happy.
for sure. Like wealth is a mindset, right? And there's different variables to it. So it's one is like financial, and of course, if you have two children, there's going to be a lot of implications of what you need to do to make sure that everything is okay, right? But then once that's kind of filled, you kind of want to like almost backfill to the health, freedom, time, like about five different kind of pillars that complete a life, right? But it's almost like people fall too far into one bucket and completely forget the others, thinking that this will solve that specific problem. And you probably know that as well, like in like an entrepreneur house, right? That it's going to be the realities that you need to work on those different
Mhm.
buckets. When you mentioned earlier about your writing or people's writing is a reflection of where they want to be, I remember I spoke to Sahil Bloom in New York
Mhm.
in December. I had him on my show, and I asked him a lot about these kind of about effectively models for like running relationships and running businesses, and he said these are things that are focal in my mind that I'm trying to improve, and he really works on the full kind of a flywheel effect of this. So it's just quite interesting, right? Because someone like that who's super successful in pretty much whatever domain he wanted to be in, right? It was
Mhm.
baseball, it was the VC world, it was now as an entrepreneur, it's as a writer, it's as an
Yeah.
athlete, like whatever domain he's in, he's still thinking about the impact of like family, relationships, time,
Mhm.
mental health, and physical health.
Yeah. Matthew McConaughey says that like he defines success into 5 different buckets as a measure of 5 different things. So it's not
Mm,
just, how much money am I making? It's also, am I being a good husband? How am I with my kids? And he rates himself every month on those things. And he's like, am I in the red or am I in the black? And like
mm,
you basically, the the difficult part about talking about success is that success means different things to different people. So you and I can have an entire conversation about success, but without defining it for each other, we are talking past each other, because to you maybe success means building the biggest business in the world, maybe to me success means raising the best kids in the world. And it's like that's hard, right? Because you have to like be able to measure it in a certain way. How do I know I'm achieving my goals? And for example, if you want to be an athlete, it's pretty easy to measure, like, what's my time on this half marathon, what's my time on this marathon. um, if you want to do it in your personal life, it's a little bit harder, but it is possible. How many um, Jesse Itzler talks about this a lot. Like, how many mini adventures did we do as a family this month? Like, that can be a measure of quote unquote success. But it's like, when you want, what is the quote? It's like, you can't move what you don't measure. So if you want
100%.
to get better at something, whether it's business or personal, you have to find ways to measure it so you know that you are improving.
I'm absolutely about that because, and my partner always like laughs at me for all the shit that I measure, right? But if it's in a business, you'd be measuring like your P&L, your churn, and everything. But in
Mhm.
your personal life or in your health or when you're running, you'll measure your times, right? In the gym, I'll measure my weights, my body weight, even because
Yeah.
it's not a full reflection, but it's an indication of where we
Indicate.
currently are, right? And it's just a metric on a screen on a dashboard to show you green,
Mhm.
amber, or gold. But I think without those, you're spinning your wheels, and that's kind of when well, I would fall into the kind of anxiety space because it's like, where am I? I'm in the ether of
Yeah.
the world.
Just floating by.
But it's a reality though of like kind of our brains is the way we're kind of wired towards like, I'm not necessarily saying more, but wanting to get better, right? Just wanting to
Yes.
improve, right? I want to ask you about content, and you mentioned that the average American spends 13 hours a day consuming content.
Yeah.
How does that happen? Because is that a combination of like Instagram and Twitter, or is that like everything between like the news telling us that the world is exploding and everything? By the way, when I was in America at Christmas, I couldn't believe the national, not national, the state news. Like it was almost like a
Oh.
comedy.
Oh. Oh my
And
God. I don't. Yeah.
I was in North Carolina. That's where my partner's from, and we would actually watch it as a joke coming up to Christmas, and it would literally be like a comedian, it'd be like a comedy show, and you could not replicate it. I couldn't explain to you now. I'd have to show it to you, and it was like this cannot be real.
It's Yeah, I have a hot take, which is that news on TV is not real journalism. There's nothing journalistic about it. Remind me the last time that like CNN or Fox broke a news story. It's so bad. It's all horrible. I don't watch it. I don't recommend it. But if you think about, I want like whoever is listening to this podcast right now, ask yourself like, when was the last time that I was bored? I had nothing to do, because this is how it happens, right? Like, you're bored. That's why I asked you if you listen to something on your walks, because a lot of the time, even when we're, on a walk, we're still consuming content. Um, for a lot of people, let's say you're by yourself, you're feeling a little bored, and you get your phone and you go on Instagram. You fill every moment. And it's like, that's why the times where you're getting a haircut or the times where you're in the shower or driving are the only times that you can have ideas, because that time is not filled by other people's voices.
Mm. That's how it stacks up, right? Because people don't realize it. Even looking at your phone screen time, it's not a true reflection because it's a combination of everything. And I would nearly put into that bracket too, like the information of like gossip, like that
Mhm.
constant kind of gossip and talking about it. And one of my mates, Rob, he mentioned before, like if you're at a table, dinner table or lunch table, whatever, and if you just sit silent, someone generally brings up someone's name, and that's when you should actually leave. It's like generally
Huh,
that's like
I like
it's like a
that.
default. It's like a default level because people don't want to talk about themselves. They want to talk about like all the other problems. And I've actually just observed then, I could have been 100% victim to this at times, right? But it's a good observation just to say like, what are we filling the space with? Because that's kind of what social media is. It's just like you're looking into someone's life for better
Yeah.
or for worse, and then you're taking that information. So, just an interesting way to look at it because we see stats like that and think, oh, like they're dumbasses, but that's not the reality. Usually, it's like we're part of that, contributing to that machine which is why we
100%.
need to unplug this podcast and go walking, go walk in the
Yeah,
garden. So I want to say a massive thank you for this, Polina. I do not want to take too much of your time. Let's do our next session in person. I would love to do that in
let's do it.
person. Give enough time and take it nice and easy. But I really appreciate this, and I want to definitely keep up to date with the profile, especially with some of the additions you're coming out soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. This was a pleasure.